Good evening, everyone, and thanks for attending. Tonight marks the culmination, if not the end, of the work of the WIT's National Minimum Wage Research Initiative, which was set up a little bit over a year ago. In that time, we've commissioned 8 working papers, 7 policy briefs, not all of which are out, and you should look out for the working papers and the briefs coming next week. Our 2 summary reports. We hosted a symposium, 5 other events, more op-eds and radio interviews than I care to remember, and fed into the political process underway. I mention these for 2 reasons. Firstly, as an indication of the public appetite around what is a very important issue. And the second is to thank, in a public way, our team. Outside is Michelle and Tulo, who have handled much of the admin. Inside is some of our authors. Yana is Brian Mahura, Notya is Mapepo Sepula, and Bandili Ingidi, Eli Strauss, Arden Finn, Asgar Aldazar, Lotta, Jesse Harbour, Nicola Punsvinum, the head of our unit, Elena, and above all, Ruth Castel-Branco, who's the author of the other report, as well as 4 of our policy briefs. I'd also like to thank all those in our school at WITS who have supported us, as well as the prestigious academics and civil society and labor leaders who first suggested this research on our oversight team. Also thanks to our funders. The oversight team are listed, as well as other people who have reviewed our work in the reports themselves, some of whom are in the audience this evening. Also thanks to FES, Oxfam, Great Britain, ELO, who assisted right back from the outset, ELO, Norway, and the PERSA research project, as well as to FES staff for their ongoing support. Okay, I know that's that is a long list, and I am moving on now. Tonight's event is slightly peculiar. It's the launch of a report in which the report is not the main topic to be discussed. What I'd like to do is briefly deal with some of the findings of those reports, and then hand over to our main event. Tonight releases 2 reports. The first is policy considerations for the design and implementation of a national minimum wage for South Africa, which is by Ruth Castel-Branco, and the other is a national minimum wage for South Africa. The former deals with the policy-related issues, and the latter summarizes research about the potential impact of a national minimum wage in South Africa. At the heart of the second is an attempt to understand what a national minimum wage means, or would mean, for both workers and businesses in our economy. A national minimum wage would establish a wage floor under which no employer would be legally allowed to pay their employees. Compared to a sectorally differentiated system, which we have now, a national minimum wage covers all workers, is easier to enforce, and does not set lower minima in sectors with a higher concentration of vulnerable workers. It can also be set to account for other policy objectives, such as reducing inequality, and take account of the economy-wide impacts. According to the ILO, the objective of minimum wages is to ensure that a worker's basic needs are met. And that it must be set at a meaningful level in order to ensure this, as well as to take account of economic factors. The local NEDLAC process has emphasized minimum wage, the national minimum wage, as a tool to reduce inequality. South Africa, as we all know, has one of the highest, if not the highest level of inequality in the world. It also has a crisis of working poverty, with 5.5 million full-time workers unable to meet the most basic poverty needs of themselves and their dependents. There is no doubt that the economy will have to adjust to the implementation of a minimum wage. I prefer to the foreground the role of minimum wages in reducing poverty and inequality. But I'm going to talk briefly on some of the other ways in which the economy adjusts. The boogeyman, which the business pundits revel in misrepresenting, is the potential impact on employment. The most conclusive literature on this is the most recent 7 meta-analyses, studies which synthesize the existing body of empirical research. And they show that a moderate increase in minimum wages has a small, neutral, and often statistically undetectable impact on employment. They show that overall a 10% increase in minimum wages leads to between a 0.003% and 0.7% fall in employment. The impact is differentiated by industry, region, demographic group, etc. In South Africa, of the 6 sectors studies, 5 have been shown to have no impact on employment, with agriculture being the exception. It is not to say there is never a impact on employment, but that it is small and on aggregate negligible. What is left out of these studies is the macroeconomic impact of minimum wages, which entails a shift in employment between sectors, as well as the possibility or likelihood of a demand stimulus to the economy. This is precisely what our statistical modeling found in our report shows, that there is a marginal fall in employment of 0.3%, and a shift in employment between sectors. When you really think about it, these are intuitive despite the fact that we are often told otherwise. It's intuitive because ultimately employment is determined by what's output in the economy and investment, and that is ultimately determined by demand in the economy. Further, there are a range of ways in which firms in the economy adjust to higher wages. The research shows that the least likely are a reduction in hours worked, in in-firm training, in non-wage benefits. There's inconclusive evidence over whether there is a shift between low-skilled and high-skilled workers. There's sometimes a small rise in prices. Most prominent is increases in productivity, both through efficiency on the shop floor and increased effort by workers. as well as wage compression, trimming of profit margins, and a boost in aggregate demand. This is again what our statistical modeling found. The results highlight that average household income, especially for the poorest, rise, that there's an increase in productivity, that output increases, and that there is that our GDP growth is higher under the scenario of a minimum wage. I am grossly out of time, so I want to deal with a few more things, if you will bear with me, okay? This is many late nights, so I'm going to be ill-disciplined. Most importantly is the international and local evidence around the impact of minimum wages on inequality and poverty. They've been shown to have a decrease in inequality across Latin America, as well as in Indonesia, Russia, China, India, and in Europe, including in the UK. Again, our statistical modeling indicates just that there's a fall in the Gini coefficient and also a fall in poverty, which is again in line with research from developing countries. In South Africa, our poverty head count is predicted to fall by around 2%. The decline being most pronounced in black South Africans. So if correctly designed, properly implemented, a national minimum wage has a potential to meaningfully increase wages of the working poor and to sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. And to transform the lives of ordinary South Africans. But what does it mean to be correctly designed? And that's the topic of the second report, which emphasizes, and I'm sorry I'm going to zip through those, the important role of social partners, the important role of a minimum wage oversight body which is independent from government and well-resourced, that the national minimum wage should be set to encompass as many workers as it can, whilst there might be room for certain levels of exceptions and exemptions, that it's important to define what counts as remuneration and the time worked, so workers aren't forced, for example, to work overtime, and that it must be enforced with both carrots and sticks. I can take this in the Q&A because I'm going to wrap up now. There's three benchmarks which are often used for what the level might be, and those I'm not going to go through, but fall in the 4,000 to 5,500 range, which is shown to be sustainable by our modeling. So that, in more time than I was allowed, is some of the main findings of the reports. What I want to end with, and it's just this last paragraph here, okay, is why it is that we've chosen to organize this evening's event in the way that we have. In part because many of you, if you've followed what's going on, have already heard me and others say exactly what I've said thus far, emphasizing the role of minimum wages in reducing poverty and inequality, and as part of a solution to South Africa's current economic malaise. So South Africa is not about, so this evening is not about that. This evening is about filling an important absence in our work. And that is that minimum wages don't necessarily occur on their own. They're part of a political process, one which involves politics, struggle, and contestation. We've studiously avoided dealing with these issues so far. But the debate in South Africa has become stale, with each camp in their corner with more or less evidence. And we decided that it would be more interesting to open up a new element of that conversation, which is a conversation about what it means to advocate for like a national minimum wage, and also what a story, what a long-term story of that like national minimum wage might teach us. Having heard Stephanie at UCT last week, I have no doubt that it will be a very interesting presentation. Thanks very much.